If you want to understand why UNICEF's 2025 Youth Mental Health Study found that 73% of Gen Z reports feeling lonely, here's what Jordan Peterson would tell you to do tonight. Sit in your room, turn off your phone, and ask yourself one simple question. The answer you get will be uncomfortable, but it'll explain why your generation feels more isolated than any before it. And here's the thing nobody talks about. While research shows factors like doom scrolling and remote work affect your attention, the real reason runs much deeper than these surface explanations. Peterson's framework reveals exactly how to fix it, starting with one core psychological principle that changes everything about how you connect with others. The digital paradox nobody talks about. This brings us to what I call the digital paradox nobody talks about. Your generation has access to more communication technology than every previous generation combined, with digital platforms everywhere you look. McKinsey found that Gen Z drives 41% of wellness spending, showing just how immersed you are in this digital world. You can video call someone in Tokyo at 3 a.m. or join a live stream with thousands of strangers talking about anything you want. Yet UNICEF's study found that 73% of you report feeling more alone than your grandparents did when their only options were landline phones and handwritten letters. Think about your own life for a second. You probably have hundreds of Instagram followers, maybe thousands. Your phone buzzes with notifications all day. You're in multiple group chats where people share memes and random thoughts. You watch TikToks from creators who feel like friends because you know their morning routines and relationship drama. You comment on posts, you react to stories, you send DMs. By every measurable standard, you're more connected than humans have ever been. So why do you feel completely empty scrolling through your phone at 2 a.m.? Why does getting 50 likes on a post feel satisfying for about 30 seconds before that hollow feeling creeps back in? Why can you spend 6 hours on social media and still feel like nobody really knows you? The answer comes down to something Peterson talks about constantly: the difference between connection and contact. Here's what I mean. You can send a video DM to check in on someone, but it's completely different from sitting across from them and asking how they're really doing, then waiting for the actual answer instead of the automatic "I'm good" response. Verywell Mind's January 2025 survey found that 74% of teens feel peer connection online, but only 14% feel it personally. That gap tells you everything. Your generation has mastered contact. You can maintain light, pleasant interactions with dozens of people every day. You know what your acquaintances had for lunch, where they went on vacation, what concerts they attended. But here's the problem: this constant stream of contact creates the illusion that you're socially fulfilled while your deeper need for connection goes completely unmet. When you post something, you're not sharing your genuine experience, you're crafting a version of it that you think will get the best response. The sunset photo with the perfect filter and caption. The selfie taken 12 times until your smile looks effortless. The story that makes your weekend seem more interesting than it actually was. This performance becomes so automatic that you lose track of what's real underneath it. You curate your highlight reel so carefully that even you start believing it represents your actual life. Meanwhile, your real self, the one with doubts, fears, boring Tuesday nights, and genuine struggles, gets pushed further into hiding. The cruel twist is that everyone else is doing the exact same thing. You're comparing your internal reality to everyone else's performed version of themselves. Of course you feel inadequate. You're the only person whose thoughts, insecurities, and mundane moments you have full access to. Everyone else appears to have their lives figured out because that's the version they choose to broadcast. This creates an impossible situation for genuine self-acceptance. How can you be okay with who you are when everyone around you seems more successful, attractive, confident, and happy? The comparison game is rigged from the start because you're comparing your behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's carefully edited highlights. But here's what makes this particularly devastating for your generation. You don't just fear being rejected for who you really are, you've forgotten who that even is. The performance has become so constant that the performer and the performance have blended together. You desperately want to be genuinely known, but the prospect of dropping the mask terrifies you because you're not sure there's anything worthwhile underneath. This is why getting 50 likes feels empty. Those people aren't responding to you, they're responding to your performance. They're validating a curated version of your life, not your actual experience of living it. Deep down, you know the difference. That's why the satisfaction fades so quickly, why you need more and more validation to feel the same brief high. Real connection requires vulnerability. It requires showing someone your actual thoughts, your real fears, your genuine excitement about things that might seem stupid to others. Peterson talks about speaking your truth, but UNICEF's findings show that stigma prevents many young people from seeking help when they need it most. You're caught between wanting to be authentic and fearing the consequences of that authenticity. The platforms themselves are built to keep you trapped in this cycle. They profit from your engagement, not your fulfillment. They want you scrolling, posting, and seeking validation because that's what generates data and ad revenue. Your loneliness is literally their business model. The more disconnected you feel from real relationships, the more time you spend trying to fill that void with digital interactions. Here's the part that'll make you uncomfortable. This isn't just happening to you, you're participating in creating it. Every time you choose to scroll instead of call a friend, every time you post a performance instead of sharing something real, every time you accept surface-level digital interaction as a substitute for genuine conversation, you're reinforcing the very system that's making you lonely. Your generation has convinced itself that this constant contact is connection, but it's actually preventing connection. You're so busy maintaining these shallow digital relationships that you never develop the skills or create the space for deeper ones. You've become experts at seeming social while remaining fundamentally alone. The most isolated people I know have the most active social media accounts. They can tell you exactly what hundreds of people are doing at any given moment, but they can't name 3 people who truly understand them. They're drowning in contact while starving for connection. This is why Peterson's approach matters. He doesn't tell you to delete social media or reject technology. He tells you to be honest about what these things actually provide versus what you actually need. The solution isn't to blame the platforms or wait for society to change. The solution requires looking at your own role in maintaining these hollow interactions and making different choices. But before you can make those choices, you need to face something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. There's a question that cuts through all the digital noise and forces you to confront the real reason you feel so isolated. The uncomfortable question that changes everything. Tonight, after you finish watching this video, I want you to try Peterson's most powerful self-examination technique. In his 2025 blog on the sacred responsibility of personal reflection, he emphasizes this exact approach. Turn off your phone, sit somewhere quiet, and ask yourself this question. What's one thing I'm doing that's pushing people away from me that I know I'm doing but I keep doing it anyway? Don't rush to answer. Sit with the discomfort. Let your mind work through the resistance. You'll get an answer, and it won't be one you want to hear, but it'll be the one you need. Carl Jung emphasized the importance of seeing God in the mundane moments of self-reflection like this. Research from Lally et al. Shows that micro-improvements in daily patterns can create profound changes over time. Most people won't do this exercise because they already know what the answer will reveal. Maybe you're the person who turns every conversation back to yourself. Maybe you cancel plans last minute whenever something better comes up. Maybe you're so afraid of being rejected that you reject others first. The specific behavior doesn't matter as much as your willingness to acknowledge it exists. Your generation has gotten exceptionally good at avoiding this kind of honest self-reflection. When you feel uncomfortable emotions, you have infinite distractions available immediately. Feeling anxious? Open TikTok. Feeling sad? Watch Netflix. Feeling lonely? Scroll Instagram to see what everyone else is doing. The problem is that these same tools that help you avoid difficult feelings also prevent you from processing them and growing from them. Peterson's technique forces you to confront something your generation particularly struggles with, the difference between what happens to you and what you contribute to what happens to you. It's much easier to blame your loneliness on dating apps being terrible, social media creating unrealistic expectations, your generation being antisocial, or society becoming more isolated. These factors all play a role, but focusing on them keeps you powerless to change your situation. When you ask yourself what you're doing to push people away, You're taking responsibility for your part in your own isolation. This feels scary because it means you can't just wait for external circumstances to improve. It means you have to look at your own patterns of behavior and admit that some of them aren't working. But here's the thing, if you're contributing to the problem, that also means you have the power to contribute to the solution. Let's walk through what happens when you actually sit with this question without distractions. First comes the resistance. Your brain will immediately want to deflect. I'm not pushing people away, they're just busy. Dating is hard for everyone right now. People don't want deep friendships anymore. These thoughts aren't necessarily wrong, but they're incomplete. They're your mind's way of protecting you from having to examine your own behavior. Push past that initial resistance and stay with the question. What usually emerges next are patterns you've been dimly aware of, but never fully acknowledged. Maybe you realize you always wait for others to reach out first because you're afraid of seeming needy, but this leaves people feeling like you don't actually care about them. Maybe you notice that you share your problems with friends, but rarely ask about theirs, leaving them feeling used rather than valued. The fear underneath all of this is that if people knew who you really were, with all your flaws, insecurities, and imperfections, they would reject you. So you keep parts of yourself hidden, but this creates exactly the isolation you're trying to avoid. People can only connect with what you show them. If you only show them a carefully curated version of yourself, that's all they can relate to. The real you stays lonely because it never gets seen. Consider how Lally's research on habit formation shows that even something as simple as flossing takes an average of 66 days to become automatic. The same principle applies to the social patterns that undermine your connections. Maybe you've spent years automatically deflecting compliments because accepting them feels uncomfortable, but this behavior signals to others that their positive feelings toward you aren't welcome. Or perhaps you've developed a habit of making self-deprecating jokes whenever conversations get too sincere, which teaches people that emotional intimacy isn't safe with you. These small, repeated behaviors compound over time. Each instance might seem insignificant, but together they create the relationship dynamics you experience. The person who consistently changes the subject when friends share problems eventually finds that friends stop sharing. The person who always has an excuse for why they can't commit to plans eventually stops getting invited. Here's what makes Peterson's question so powerful. It assumes you already have some self-awareness about your problematic patterns. It's not asking you to discover something completely hidden. It's asking you to acknowledge something you already know but haven't wanted to face. Most people have a pretty good sense of their own relationship patterns if they're honest with themselves. The self-sabotage often stems from deeper fears about worthiness and belonging. If you don't believe you deserve good relationships, you'll unconsciously behave in ways that confirm that belief. If you're convinced that people will eventually leave anyway, you might push them away first to maintain some sense of control. If you think you're boring or inadequate, you might never let anyone get close enough to discover whether that's actually true. This is why avoiding the inner work keeps you trapped in cycles of superficial connection. You meet new people, things go well initially, but then your unconscious patterns kick in. You repeat the same behaviors that pushed away the last person, and the next person, and the one after that. Without examining these patterns, you're doomed to repeat them indefinitely. The promise of Peterson's approach is that awareness creates the possibility for change. Once you clearly see what you're doing, you can start doing something different. But the awareness has to come first, and it has to be specific. Vague self-criticism like, "I'm bad at relationships," doesn't help. Specific recognition like, "I withdraw emotionally whenever someone gets too close because I'm afraid they'll discover I'm not as interesting as I seem," gives you something concrete to work with. This question isn't meant to make you feel guilty or ashamed about your patterns. It's meant to empower you with accurate information about how you operate in relationships. You can't change what you won't acknowledge. The discomfort you feel when answering honestly isn't punishment, it's the friction that comes with growth. But here's what makes this particularly challenging for your generation. The patterns you'll uncover aren't just personal habits. They're survival strategies you developed in response to growing up in a world that rewarded performance over authenticity. Why your generation wears masks, and it's not about COVID. These strategies shaped how you learn to navigate the world, but they came with a hidden cost that nobody talks about. Your generation didn't just grow up with social media. You grew up learning that survival meant becoming really good at creating appealing versions of yourselves. From the moment you could hold a phone, you were unconsciously studying what got likes, what got ignored, what made people respond positively. You became experts at reading the room and adjusting your presentation accordingly. The problem is that this skill, which feels essential for navigating modern social life, has turned you into strangers to your own authentic selves. Think about how many different versions of yourself you manage in a single day. There's the version you present on Instagram, carefully curated, aesthetically pleasing, showing just enough vulnerability to seem relatable, but not enough to make people uncomfortable. There's your LinkedIn persona, professional, ambitious, grateful for opportunities. Your TikTok self might be funny and spontaneous, your Snapchat self more casual and unfiltered. Then there's how you show up in group chats with different friend groups, how you act around your family, how you present in work meetings, how you behave on dates. Each of these personas requires mental energy to maintain. You have to remember which aspects of yourself to emphasize and which to hide depending on the context. You monitor reactions constantly, adjusting your performance based on feedback. Did that joke land? Should you seem more confident? Less eager, more successful. The cognitive load of managing all these different versions of yourself is exhausting, but it happens so automatically that you might not even realize how much energy it consumes. Harmony Healthcare found that 78% of your generation admits to phone addiction, which means you're constantly switching between these different personas throughout the day. The feedback loops are immediate and relentless. Previous generations might have put on different personas in different social contexts, but they had time between interactions to reconnect with themselves. You're getting real-time feedback on your performance all day long through likes, comments, views, and messages. The temptation to keep adjusting and optimizing your persona based on this feedback is overwhelming. These digital masks feel necessary because they often are, at least in the short term. The always positive influencer persona gets you social media engagement and helps you avoid dealing with your actual problems. The effortlessly successful achiever makes you appear competent and ambitious to potential employers or romantic partners. The unbothered cool person protects you from seeming too eager or desperate for connection. Each mask serves a function. They help you fit in, avoid rejection, and maintain a sense of control over how others perceive you. But here's what Peterson would tell you about these masks. They create the very isolation they're meant to prevent. When you present a carefully crafted version of yourself, any positive response you get is to the performance, not to you. People might like your Instagram posts, but they're not loving the real you who took 47 photos to get that one perfect shot and felt anxious about whether it was good enough to post. They're responding to the final product, not the person behind it. The masks become prisons when you lose track of who you actually are underneath them. You've gotten so good at reading what people want and giving it to them that you've forgotten what you actually think, feel, or want. You might catch yourself having thoughts like, what would someone like me post about this? Instead of, what do I actually think about this? The performance becomes so automatic that the line between who you are and who you're pretending to be gets completely blurred. The terror of dropping the mask is real because you genuinely don't know if there's anything worthwhile underneath it. What if your authentic self is boring? What if your real thoughts are stupid? What if your actual personality isn't as interesting as the one you've crafted? What if people realize you're not as confident, successful, or put together as you appear? These fears feel existential because your sense of self has become so intertwined with your ability to perform acceptability. Peterson's insight cuts right through this dilemma. He points out that people can only truly love the real you, not the performance you put on. When someone responds positively to your mask, they're not actually connecting with you, they're connecting with your act. This means that no matter how much validation you get for your performance, you'll still feel fundamentally alone because your authentic self remains unseen and unknown. The relationships built on these false foundations inevitably crumble under pressure. You can only maintain a performance for so long before cracks start to show. The person who seemed effortlessly successful has to admit they're struggling. The always positive influencer has bad days they can't hide. The unbothered cool person reveals they actually care deeply about things. When reality doesn't match the image, people feel deceived, and you feel exposed and vulnerable. This creates a vicious cycle where each relationship failure reinforces your belief that you need to perform better next time. Instead of recognizing that the mask itself is the problem, you conclude that you need a better mask. You study what went wrong, adjust your persona, and try again with the next person. But the fundamental issue remains: you're trying to build genuine connections while presenting false versions of yourself. What makes this particularly challenging is that virtual interactions lack the embodied cues that help humans connect authentically. UNICEF found that 6 in 10 Gen Z feel overwhelmed by the news cycle, which compounds the exhaustion of maintaining these digital personas. Verywell Mind's research shows that 50% of your generation says sleep problems hurt their mental health, often because you're mentally and physically drained from performing connection rather than experiencing it. The people worth having relationships with are the ones who can handle your real thoughts, feelings, and experiences. They're the ones who don't need you to be constantly positive, effortlessly successful, or unbothered by things that actually bother you. But you'll never find these people if you never show them who you actually are. The mask that feels like protection is actually preventing the very connections you're desperately seeking. The question becomes whether you're willing to risk the temporary discomfort of dropping the mask for the possibility of real connection. Because until you're brave enough to be seen as you actually are, you'll remain invisible even to yourself. But there's another layer to this isolation that most people miss entirely, one that affects how and where you spend most of your waking hours. The truth about remote work and human connection. Your generation entered the workforce during the biggest shift in work culture in decades, and nobody talks about what this actually did to your social development. The IVHBA found that 22% are working remotely by 2025, while the Conference Board documented how always-on stress in remote roles has fundamentally changed workplace dynamics. Remote work didn't just change where you do your job, it eliminated the organic relationship-building opportunities that previous generations took for granted. The casual conversations by the coffee machine, the impromptu lunch invitations, the after-work drinks that turned colleagues into friends, all of that disappeared behind screens and scheduled video calls. Most of your professional interactions now happen through a rectangle on your laptop. You see people from the chest up in carefully curated home office backgrounds. You hear their voices through compressed audio. You watch their facial expressions through pixelated video feeds. Your brain knows something is missing from these interactions, but you might not realize exactly what it is: the full presence of another human being in physical space. Peterson talks about the importance of embodied interaction for human flourishing, and there's real psychology behind this. When you're physically present with someone, you pick up on subtle cues that don't translate through screens. The way they shift in their chair when discussing something uncomfortable, how their energy changes when they get excited about an idea, the natural pause in conversation that feels comfortable rather than awkward. These micro-interactions build trust and understanding in ways that video calls simply cannot replicate. The workplace relationships that seemed trivial turned out to be crucial for mental health. Consider something as simple as the shared eye roll when someone mentioned another unnecessary meeting, which could lead to a spontaneous lunch where a colleague mentioned they were going through a tough time and you ended up having a real conversation about life. These moments weren't scheduled or agenda-driven. They just happened naturally when humans occupied the same physical space. Verywell Mind found that 58% of people make new friends through fitness groups, showing that offline community building still works when people create opportunities for it. Remote work has made it incredibly easy to avoid the vulnerability that real relationships require. You can keep your camera off during meetings. You can respond to messages when you feel like it, rather than engaging in real-time conversation. You can maintain professional distance without anyone questioning it, because everyone is maintaining professional distance. The tools that were supposed to make work more flexible have often made human connection more optional. Here's what's particularly dangerous about this setup: it becomes a comfort zone trap that extends far beyond work. When you spend most of your waking hours interacting with people through screens, you lose practice at the skills required for in-person connection. Reading body language, managing awkward silences, navigating the unpredictability of unscripted conversation. These abilities atrophy from lack of use, making face-to-face interactions feel increasingly uncomfortable and exhausting. The loneliest people I know have optimized their lives for maximum efficiency and minimum human friction. They work from home, order groceries online, stream entertainment, and handle most social interaction through text messages and social media. They've eliminated almost every opportunity for spontaneous human contact. Their days are productive and their stress levels are low, but they're slowly dying of social isolation without realizing it. You might tell yourself that you prefer working from home because you're more productive, less distracted, better able to focus. These things might all be true, but they miss the larger point about what humans actually need to thrive. Productivity isn't everything. Sometimes the interruption from a colleague asking how your weekend was serves a more important function than whatever task it pulled you away from. Sometimes the inefficiency of in-person collaboration creates the kind of connection that makes work feel meaningful rather than just profitable. Digital interaction has become so convenient that many people in your generation have forgotten how to initiate and maintain relationships that require effort. When everything can be done through apps, dating, socializing, networking, even therapy, the messy, unpredictable work of building relationships in physical spaces starts to feel unnecessary and overwhelming. Why deal with the awkwardness of asking someone to grab coffee when you can just follow them on Instagram and feel like you're staying connected? But convenience isn't the same as connection. The path of least resistance rarely leads to the most meaningful relationships. Peterson would tell you that anything worthwhile requires effort and discomfort. The easy option usually isn't the growth option. When you choose digital interaction because it's more comfortable, you're often choosing to stay stuck in patterns that keep you isolated. The shift to remote work has coincided with rising rates of anxiety and depression among young adults, and this isn't a coincidence. UNICEF's findings show that 4 in 10 youth feel stigma at school and workplace, which compounds the pressure of managing digital personas across multiple professional and personal platforms simultaneously. Humans are social creatures who need regular, meaningful contact with other humans to maintain psychological health. We need to feel seen, heard, and valued by people who know us beyond our professional output or social media presence. Physical presence carries information that screens cannot transmit. The energy someone brings into a room, the way they smell, how they take up space, whether their laughter feels genuine or performed. These details might seem superficial, but they're how humans have assessed trustworthiness and compatibility for thousands of years. Your brain is constantly processing this information when you're around other people, and it feels unsatisfied when forced to operate without it. Remote work culture has also created an expectation that all interaction should be purposeful and agenda-driven. You schedule calls for specific reasons. You send messages when you need something. The aimless conversation that serves no productive function but builds human connection has become seen as a waste of time. But these supposedly unproductive interactions often produce the trust and understanding that make productive collaboration possible. The solution isn't to abandon remote work entirely, but to recognize what it cannot provide and to actively seek out what's missing. Meaningful connection requires intentional effort in a digital world. It means choosing face-to-face interaction even when it's less convenient. It means tolerating the awkwardness of unscripted conversation. It means accepting that some of the most important human experiences cannot be optimized or streamlined. Your generation has been sold the idea that technology can replace human presence, but your loneliness suggests otherwise. The screens that connect you to everyone keep you isolated from anyone. The tools that make work more efficient often make life less meaningful. The convenience that eliminates friction also eliminates the kind of beautiful accidents that turn strangers into friends and colleagues into family. Real connection happens in the spaces between planned interactions. It requires the courage to be present with other humans in all their unpredictable, inefficient, gloriously messy humanity. But acknowledging all these external factors, the digital masks, the remote work isolation, the social media performance, only gets you halfway to solving the problem. There's something else Peterson would force you to confront, something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. The responsibility no one wants to hear about. That something is the responsibility no one wants to hear about. Your loneliness isn't just something that's happening to you, it's something you're actively participating in creating. Peterson's most controversial insight about personal responsibility applies directly to your social isolation, and most people hate hearing this because it means they can't just wait for external circumstances to improve. It means you have to look at your own behavior and acknowledge that some of it isn't working. This idea feels brutal because we're taught to think of loneliness as a condition that befalls us, like catching a cold or getting caught in bad weather. Society tells us that Gen Z is lonely because of social media, dating apps, remote work, or cultural changes beyond our control. These factors all play a role, but focusing exclusively on them keeps you powerless to change your situation. When you see yourself as a victim of circumstances, you're essentially saying you have no agency over one of the most important aspects of human experience, your relationships with other people. Taking responsibility for your loneliness is both empowering and terrifying because it means admitting you have more control over your social reality than you've been willing to acknowledge. It means recognizing that the patterns showing up in your relationships aren't just bad luck or other people's problems. They're at least partially the result of choices you're making, often unconsciously. This recognition is terrifying because it forces you to examine behaviors you'd rather ignore. But it's empowering because it means you actually have the power to change things. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice. Maybe you're the person who always cancels plans when you're feeling anxious or overwhelmed. You tell yourself you're just being honest about your mental health needs, but from the other person's perspective, you're unreliable. They stop inviting you to things because they've learned not to count on you showing up. You interpret this as people not understanding your struggles, but the reality is that you've trained them to expect disappointment. Or maybe you're someone who shares your problems with friends, but rarely asks about theirs. You think you're being vulnerable and authentic, but you're actually creating one-sided relationships where others feel used rather than valued. When people start pulling away, you conclude that nobody cares about your struggles, missing the fact that you've never demonstrated much interest in theirs. Your generation has particular patterns of self-sabotage that often go unrecognized. The perfectionism that makes you avoid trying new things or meeting new people because you're afraid of looking awkward or inexperienced. The fear of being judged that causes you to present such a polished version of yourself that people feel they can't be real with you. The anxiety about saying the wrong thing that makes you so careful in conversations that you come across as distant or uninterested. The emotional unavailability is perhaps the most common form of relationship self-sabotage among young adults today. You want connection, but you're terrified of vulnerability, so you keep people at arm's length through various strategies. You might use humor to deflect any conversation that gets too serious. You might change the subject whenever someone tries to talk about feelings. You might maintain such busy schedules that you never have time for the kind of unstructured hanging out that builds deeper friendships. These behaviors feel protective in the moment, but they create exactly the isolation you're trying to avoid. People can sense when you're holding back, when you're not fully present, when you're managing your image instead of engaging authentically. They respond by holding back themselves, creating the superficial interactions that leave everyone feeling unsatisfied. The victim mentality around loneliness is particularly seductive because it feels like it protects your self-esteem. If your loneliness is caused by dating apps being shallow, social media creating unrealistic expectations, or your generation being antisocial, then there's nothing wrong with you personally. You're just caught up in larger cultural problems that aren't your fault. This narrative feels safer than acknowledging that you might be contributing to your own isolation through specific behaviors and attitudes. But this protection comes at a massive cost. It keeps you stuck and powerless to change your situation. When you see yourself as a victim of circumstances, you're essentially waiting for the world to change around you. McKinsey research shows Gen Z spends 6 hours, 27 minutes daily on phones, yet many still blame external factors rather than examining how this behavior shapes their relationships. Meanwhile, you're not developing the skills, habits, or self-awareness that would allow you to build better relationships regardless of external circumstances. Peterson's framework doesn't mean beating yourself up or taking all the blame for relationship problems. It means recognizing that in any interaction between two people, you have control over exactly half of the dynamic, your half. You can't control whether someone likes you, but you can control whether you show up authentically. You can't control whether someone wants to be your friend, but you can control whether you're the kind of person others want to be around. Taking responsibility means asking yourself hard questions about your own patterns. Do you initiate plans with people you want to spend time with, or do you wait for them to reach out first? When someone shares something personal with you, do you respond with empathy and curiosity, or do you immediately relate it back to your own experience? Do you follow through on commitments you make, or do you treat social plans as tentative based on how you feel that day? The resistance to this idea is enormous because it's genuinely easier to blame external factors than to examine your own behavior. Dating apps make convenient scapegoats for bad dating experiences. Social media provides an easy explanation for why relationships feel shallow. Remote work explains why you don't have close friendships with colleagues. These explanations contain truth, but they're incomplete without acknowledging your own role in the dynamic. People are naturally drawn to those who take ownership of their lives rather than those who see themselves as victims of circumstance. This isn't about toxic positivity or pretending problems don't exist. It's about approaching challenges from a position of agency rather than helplessness. When you take responsibility for your social reality, you become someone others want to be around because you're not constantly draining their energy with complaints about things beyond their control. UNICEF's Youth Mental Health Study found that while 52% are knowledgeable about mental health resources and 55% find their coping strategies effective, many still struggle with taking ownership of their relationship patterns. The APA's research on authentic communication suggests asking yourself deeper questions like, what are my preconditions for satisfaction in relationships, rather than focusing on what others should change. This shift from victim to agent is uncomfortable but necessary. Your loneliness might have contributing factors beyond your control, but your response to it is entirely within your power to change. The question becomes whether you're willing to do the uncomfortable work of examining your own patterns and building the kind of person others genuinely want to connect with. Building real confidence in an Instagram world. The real work begins when you start building something that can't be performed or faked authentic confidence in a world designed to make you feel inadequate. Your generation faces a unique challenge that no previous generation has dealt with, developing genuine self-worth while constantly exposed to other people's carefully curated highlight reels. Every time you open Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn, you're bombarded with images of people who seem more successful, attractive, confident, and put together than you feel. This constant comparison makes the natural confidence-building process nearly impossible because you're measuring your behind-the-scenes reality against everyone else's polished performance. Real confidence isn't what your generation has been taught to think it is. It's not about getting the most likes on your posts, having the best job title, or looking perfect in photos. Those things might give you temporary validation, but they create a confidence that's completely dependent on external circumstances and other people's opinions. True confidence comes from something much deeper, knowing that you can handle whatever life throws at you, not from avoiding difficulties or managing your image to prevent challenges from arising. Peterson's framework for building genuine confidence starts with something that sounds almost boring compared to the instant gratification your generation is used to small, daily improvements that compound over time. Lally's research on micro-improvements shows that starting with humble tasks like cleaning your room creates the foundation for bigger changes. He's not talking about dramatic life changes or major achievements. He's talking about making your bed every morning, keeping promises you make to yourself, doing one thing each day that you said you would do even when you don't feel like it. These tiny acts of self-discipline build something that can't be faked or performed. Trust in your own ability to follow through on commitments. Your generation has been conditioned to seek confidence through external markers, getting into the right college, landing the perfect job, having the ideal relationship, reaching certain fitness goals, or achieving specific social media metrics. The problem with this approach is that it creates confidence that's completely fragile and dependent on circumstances beyond your control. You might feel great when things are going well, but the moment you face a setback, rejection, or failure, your entire sense of self-worth crumbles because it was never built on solid ground. The difference between performed confidence and real confidence becomes obvious when you face genuine challenges. Performed confidence relies on avoiding situations where you might fail, look stupid, or face criticism. It requires constant management of your image and careful control of what others see. Real confidence allows you to enter situations where the outcome is uncertain, where you might struggle or make mistakes, because you trust your ability to learn, adapt, and handle whatever happens. Think about the people you know who seem genuinely confident versus those who just appear confident on social media. The genuinely confident ones aren't necessarily the most successful or attractive people. They're the ones who can laugh at their own mistakes, admit when they don't know something, and remain calm when things don't go as planned. They don't need constant reassurance from others because they have internal evidence of their own competence and resilience. Your generation's tendency to avoid discomfort actively undermines confidence development. Harmony Healthcare found that 46% of young people are diagnosed with mental health conditions and 78% admit to phone addiction, showing how screen-based avoidance has become the default response to difficulty. Every time you use technology to avoid an awkward conversation, skip a challenging situation, or distract yourself from difficult emotions, you're missing an opportunity to prove to yourself that you can handle hard things. Confidence isn't built in comfort zones. It's built by repeatedly facing situations that feel uncertain or uncomfortable and discovering that you can navigate them successfully. Social media makes this process particularly difficult because it creates the illusion that everyone else is naturally confident while you're the only one struggling. You see people posting about their successes, adventures, and happy moments, but you don't see the anxiety they felt before giving that presentation, the rejection they faced before landing that job, or the self-doubt they experience when they think no one is watching. This creates a completely distorted picture of what normal human experience looks like. The people who seem most confident online are often the ones who are most dependent on external validation in real life. They post constantly because they need the likes and comments to feel good about themselves. They share their achievements because they need others to witness their success for it to feel real. They carefully curate their image because they're terrified of being seen as anything less than perfect. This isn't confidence, it's performance anxiety disguised as self-assurance. Real confidence makes you less needy in relationships, which paradoxically makes others want to be around you more. When you're not constantly seeking reassurance, validation, or approval from others, you become someone who can give rather than someone who's always taking. You can listen to others without immediately relating everything back to your own experience. You can celebrate their successes without feeling threatened by them. You can offer support without expecting something in return. Building confidence that doesn't depend on others' opinions requires developing your own internal scorecard for success. Instead of measuring your worth by likes, follows, or external achievements, you start tracking things like whether you kept promises to yourself, faced situations that scared you, or acted according to your values even when it was difficult. These metrics can't be manipulated by algorithms or influenced by other people's moods. They're entirely within your control. Peterson's approach involves doing things that are hard but achievable, then gradually increasing the difficulty as your competence grows. Start with challenges that stretch you but don't overwhelm you. Have a difficult conversation you've been avoiding. Try something new where you might not be immediately good at it. Take on a responsibility that requires you to follow through even when motivation fades. Each time you successfully navigate something challenging, you build evidence that you can handle uncertainty and difficulty. UNICEF found that 74% of young people say schools positively impact their stress levels, showing that institutional support matters. But ultimately, the confidence you need comes from your own repeated experiences of facing challenges and discovering your resilience. It's built in the moments when you do the right thing even though it's difficult, when you tell the truth even though it's uncomfortable, and when you show up as yourself even though you might be rejected. This kind of confidence can't be taken away by changing algorithms, negative comments, or other people's success, because it's based on your relationship with yourself rather than your position relative to others. But building this internal foundation requires something your generation finds increasingly difficult: the willingness to express what you actually think and feel, even when it might not be popular. The art of truth-telling in cancel culture. This challenge becomes even more complex when you consider the social and professional risks that come with authentic expression in today's climate. Your generation faces something no previous generation has dealt with: wanting to be authentic while living in constant fear that your authentic thoughts will destroy your life. Cancel culture anxiety has made many young people so terrified of saying the wrong thing that they've stopped saying anything real at all. You've learned to speak in safe, pre-approved phrases that offend nobody, but also connect with nobody. The result is a generation that's more careful with their words than any in history, but also more lonely and disconnected, because careful speech rarely leads to genuine intimacy. Peterson's approach to truth-telling isn't about being recklessly provocative or deliberately offensive. It's about developing the skill to express your authentic thoughts in ways that create connection rather than conflict. There's a massive difference between speaking your truth and being needlessly confrontational. The goal isn't to shock people or prove how brave you are. It's to build relationships based on honesty rather than performance. Most people in your generation have developed an internal editor that's constantly running in the background, screening every thought before it becomes speech. This editor asks questions like, will this make me look bad? Could this be misinterpreted? Is this the socially acceptable opinion to have? Will this hurt my career prospects? The editor isn't entirely wrong. These are legitimate concerns in a world where screenshots live forever and context disappears. But when the editor becomes so dominant that it drowns out your authentic voice entirely, you end up sounding like everyone else and connecting with no one. The fear that being honest will lead to rejection often becomes self-fulfilling, but not in the way you think. When you constantly censor yourself and perform acceptable opinions, you attract people who are drawn to the performance rather than the person. These relationships feel hollow because they're built on a foundation of careful image management rather than genuine compatibility. The rejection you're trying to avoid by being fake is actually guaranteed. By being fake, people will eventually reject the real you when it inevitably emerges. Suppressing your authentic voice in relationships creates distance that both people can feel but neither wants to acknowledge. Your friends might sense that you're holding back, that you're not fully present, that there's more to you than what you're showing. They respond by holding back themselves, creating interactions that feel polite but not particularly meaningful. Everyone walks away feeling like something was missing, but nobody wants to be the first to risk vulnerability by being more honest. The mental health cost of constant self-censoring is enormous but often unrecognized. When you spend all day monitoring your thoughts and filtering your speech, you're essentially living in a state of chronic psychological tension. Part of your mental energy is always devoted to managing your image rather than engaging authentically with your experience. This internal split creates the kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix, because it's not physical tiredness. It's the exhaustion of living as a stranger to yourself. Peterson's framework involves starting small and building your truth-telling skills in low-stakes situations before attempting more challenging conversations. You don't begin by sharing your most controversial opinions at work or with acquaintances you barely know. You start by being more honest with close friends about small things, admitting when you didn't actually enjoy the movie everyone loved, sharing when you're having a bad day instead of defaulting to "I'm fine," expressing genuine enthusiasm about things that might seem uncool to others. These smaller acts of authenticity build the courage required for larger truth-telling moments. Each time you risk being honest about something minor and discover that people don't reject you for it, you gather evidence that authenticity is safer than you thought. Harvard's emotional learning research shows that these breakthrough moments happen when goals align with genuine insights about ourselves and others. You start to realize that most people are relieved when someone else goes first in being real, because it gives them permission to drop their own masks. The key is learning to express authentic views while remaining curious about others' perspectives rather than defensive about your own. Truth-telling doesn't mean becoming rigid or argumentative about your opinions. It means being willing to share what you actually think while remaining open to new information and different viewpoints. This combination of honesty and humility is what creates meaningful conversations rather than debates or arguments. Peterson's core principle here is simple but challenging. Speak your truth and take your consequences. The APA's research on authenticity shows that this approach significantly improves relationship quality over time, even though it might create short-term discomfort. People can usually sense when you're saying what you think they want to hear versus when you're expressing genuine thoughts and feelings. Your voice changes, your body language shifts, your energy becomes different when you move from performance to authenticity. Others respond to this shift, even if they can't consciously identify what changed. Instead of manipulating conversations with surface-level questions, try asking something that reveals deeper understanding. What preconditions would need to exist for you to feel truly satisfied in this situation? NLI's SCARF research demonstrates that this kind of active listening creates psychological safety that encourages more honest responses from others. They lean in more, ask better questions, and share more of themselves because authenticity is contagious. The irony is that people respect and trust those who speak their truth far more than those who carefully craft acceptable responses to everything. Someone who occasionally shares unpopular opinions, but does so thoughtfully and respectfully comes across as genuine and trustworthy. Someone who always says the right thing seems calculated and potentially deceptive. We instinctively understand that people who never disagree with us or never express controversial thoughts are either lying or have no real thoughts of their own. Building confidence in truth-telling often requires accepting that not everyone will like you, and that this is actually a good thing. People-pleasing might seem like a strategy for connection, but it's actually a strategy for avoiding rejection at the cost of genuine intimacy. When you try to be likable to everyone, you become interesting to no one. When you're willing to be disliked for who you actually are, you create space for people who genuinely appreciate your authentic self. The relationships that can't handle your honesty are relationships that were never going to satisfy your need for genuine connection anyway. The people who reject you for expressing authentic thoughts and feelings are people who were only interested in the performance version of you. Losing these relationships makes space for connections with people who value authenticity over agreeability. Cancel culture anxiety is often used as an excuse to avoid the vulnerability that real relationships require. Yes, there are genuine risks to speaking freely in certain contexts, but these risks are often overestimated, while the costs of chronic self-censoring are underestimated. Most conversations happen in private spaces with people who know you well enough to understand your character and intentions. The risk of viral outrage is much smaller than the guaranteed isolation that comes from never showing anyone who you really are. The art is learning to express your truth in ways that invite connection rather than create walls, but this skill can only be developed through practice. You have to be willing to make mistakes, offend people occasionally, and learn from the feedback you receive. Perfect truth-telling doesn't exist, but courageous truth-telling creates the foundation for every meaningful relationship you'll ever have. But here's something most people don't realize about developing this courage to speak authentically. It requires something your generation has almost completely lost the ability to do. Before you can know what your truth actually is, you need to spend time in quiet reflection without any external input telling you what to think or feel. The modern distraction epidemic. This inability to access your authentic thoughts stems from what I call the modern distraction epidemic. Your generation has unlimited access to entertainment, information, and stimulation 24 hours a day, and it's destroying your ability to know yourself. Every moment of potential boredom gets immediately filled with content. Waiting in line? Check TikTok. Feeling anxious? Open Netflix. Can't sleep? Scroll Instagram until your eyes burn. The constant stream of digital input means you never experience the quiet mental space where self-reflection actually happens. Previous generations had no choice but to sit with themselves sometimes. They had to endure car rides without podcasts, meals without screens, and bedtime without endless entertainment options. These moments of enforced solitude, however uncomfortable, created opportunities for internal processing that your generation systematically avoids. When you're always consuming someone else's thoughts, emotions, and experiences, you never develop the capacity to process your own. The average person in your generation checks their phone over 150 times per day. That's once every 6 minutes during waking hours. You're literally interrupting your own thought processes every few minutes with external stimulation. Your brain never gets the chance to complete a full cycle of reflection because there's always another notification, another video, another piece of content demanding your attention. This constant interruption prevents the kind of deep thinking that leads to self-knowledge and emotional maturity. Think about what happens when you feel uncomfortable emotions rising up. Sadness, anxiety, loneliness, frustration. Instead of sitting with these feelings and understanding what they're trying to tell you, you immediately reach for your phone. Within seconds, you're watching videos of other people's lives, consuming content designed to trigger dopamine responses, or engaging in conversations that distract you from whatever you were feeling. The uncomfortable emotion gets suppressed rather than processed, which means you never learn from it or develop the resilience to handle it better next time. Social media platforms, streaming services, and games are specifically designed to be addictive. They use variable reward schedules, social validation loops, and carefully calibrated difficulty curves to keep you engaged for as long as possible. Your brain gets hit with small doses of dopamine throughout the day from likes, comments, achievements, and new content, creating a dependency on external stimulation for emotional regulation. When you're not getting these hits, you feel restless, anxious, or empty, which drives you back to the apps for more stimulation. This creates a vicious cycle where the tools you use to avoid difficult emotions actually make those emotions more intense. You feel lonely, so you scroll social media to feel connected, but seeing everyone else's highlight reels makes you feel more isolated. You feel anxious, so you binge-watch shows to distract yourself, but avoiding the source of your anxiety makes it grow stronger. You feel bored, so you consume endless content, but you never develop the internal resources to find fulfillment in your own thoughts and experiences. Peterson talks about the crucial importance of boredom and solitude for psychological development. Boredom isn't actually the absence of stimulation. It's your mind's way of telling you that it's ready to process information, generate new ideas, or work through emotional material. When you immediately fill every boring moment with digital content, you're essentially telling your mind to shut up every time it tries to communicate with you. You're training yourself to be mentally passive rather than mentally active. The inability to be alone with your thoughts has serious consequences for relationship building. If you can't tolerate your own company, you'll struggle to be fully present with others. You'll be constantly distracted, always checking your phone, mentally somewhere else even when you're physically with people. Others can sense this absence even if they can't articulate it. They feel like they're competing with your devices for your attention, and they're usually losing that competition. Real intimacy requires the ability to sit in uncomfortable moments without immediately seeking distraction. Sometimes conversations get awkward. Sometimes there's silence that feels tense. Sometimes emotions come up that don't have easy solutions. If your default response to discomfort is to reach for your phone or change the subject, you'll never develop the emotional resilience needed for deep relationships. You'll stay stuck in surface-level interactions because you can't handle the vulnerability that comes with going deeper. The paradox is that all this connection to other people's lives makes you feel more disconnected from your own. You're an expert on other people's relationships, careers, travels, and achievements, but you're a stranger to your own desires, values, and emotional patterns. You can analyze someone else's Instagram post for hidden meanings, but you can't sit quietly for 10 minutes and figure out what you actually want from your own life. Digital distractions provide temporary relief from loneliness while making the underlying problem significantly worse. When you feel isolated, scrolling through social media gives you the illusion of connection without requiring the vulnerability of actual relationship building. You see what others are doing, react to their content, maybe exchange some messages, and feel like you've been social. But this pseudo-connection satisfies just enough of your social needs to reduce your motivation to seek real relationships, while not satisfying them enough to actually resolve your loneliness. Learning to sit with discomfort and difficult emotions is essential for developing authentic relationships because it's the foundation of emotional maturity. When you can tolerate anxiety without immediately seeking distraction, you become someone others can depend on during stressful times. When you can process sadness without avoiding it, you develop empathy for others going through difficult experiences. When you can sit with boredom without filling it with content, you become interesting to be around because you've developed internal resources rather than just consuming external input. McKinsey's research on Gen Z wellness priorities shows that sleep, appearance, and mindfulness rank highest, but most people try to address these through consumption rather than practice. The University of Surrey found that morning routines have 43% higher success rates when they begin with simple, non-digital activities. Using Lally's methodology for habit formation, you need a context cue, daily repetition, and roughly 60 days to reach automaticity. If you miss one day, just get back on track the next day without self-judgment. The solution isn't to eliminate all digital entertainment, but to create regular periods of undistracted time where you can reconnect with your own thoughts and feelings. Start with 10 minutes a day of sitting without any input, no music, no podcasts, no screens. Just you and whatever thoughts or emotions arise. It will feel uncomfortable at first because you've trained your brain to expect constant stimulation, but this discomfort is where growth happens. Your relationship with yourself is the foundation for every other relationship in your life, but you can't develop that relationship while constantly consuming other people's content. The path forward requires concrete steps that work with your generation's specific challenges rather than against them. The practical steps that actually work. Here's Peterson's framework adapted for your generation's specific challenges, starting with something that sounds almost too simple to work. Every morning when you wake up, make your bed. Not because clean rooms cure depression, but because you're proving to yourself that you can complete something you started. Your brain notices these small victories even when you don't consciously register them. Each completed task builds evidence that you're someone who follows through on commitments, starting with commitments to yourself. The micro-improvement approach works because your generation has been conditioned to expect instant results from everything. Apps update overnight, food arrives in minutes, entertainment streams immediately. But psychological change operates on biological time, not digital time. Your brain needs repetition and consistency to form new neural pathways. A single conversation won't cure your loneliness, but having one authentic conversation per day for 30 days will start changing how you relate to others and how they relate to you. Start with the smallest possible version of any change you want to make. Want to be more social? Don't commit to attending 3 events per week. Commit to sending one genuine text message to one person every day, asking how they're doing and actually reading their response. Want to reduce phone usage? Don't attempt a digital detox. Start by charging your phone outside your bedroom so you're not immediately scrolling when you wake up. These changes feel insignificant, but they compound in ways that dramatic lifestyle overhauls never do. Digital dependence requires surgical reduction rather than amputation. The Pew survey found that 45% of teens spend too much time online, which shows this isn't about willpower, but about systems. Going completely offline isn't realistic for your generation. You need these tools for work, school, and staying connected with people who matter. The goal is intentional usage rather than unconscious consumption. Set specific times for checking social media instead of responding to every notification immediately. Use app timers not as hard limits, but as awareness tools that make your usage visible to yourself. Create phone-free zones in your daily routine. Eat 1 meal per day without any screens present. Take a 10-minute walk without podcasts or music. Have 1 conversation per day where your phone stays in another room. These small pockets of undistracted time allow your brain to process information and emotions instead of constantly consuming new input. You'll notice thoughts and feelings that were always there, but got drowned out by constant stimulation. Authentic conversations require practice because your generation has lost many of the skills that previous generations developed naturally. Start by asking better questions. Instead of "How was your day?" try "What was the most interesting thing that happened to you today?" Instead of "How are you?" ask "What's been on your mind lately?" These questions invite real answers instead of automatic responses. When someone shares something meaningful, resist the urge to immediately relate it back to your own experience. Ask follow-up questions that show you're genuinely curious about their perspective. Share something real about yourself in every significant conversation you have. Not trauma or deep secrets, but honest thoughts and feelings that go beyond surface pleasantries. Admit when you don't know something. Express genuine enthusiasm about things that interest you, even if they might seem uncool. Acknowledge when you're struggling with something. These small acts of vulnerability give others permission to be real with you, which creates the foundation for actual connection. Physical practices matter more than your generation typically acknowledges because your mental health is inseparable from your physical state. Your brain operates differently when you're sleep-deprived, poorly nourished, or sedentary. You can't think your way out of problems that have biological components. Establish consistent sleep and wake times even when your schedule is flexible. Eat regular meals that include protein and avoid the blood sugar crashes that trigger anxiety and irritability. Move your body daily, even if it's just walking for 20 minutes. These aren't lifestyle optimizations, they're baseline requirements for emotional regulation. Setting boundaries with technology while staying functionally connected requires specific strategies rather than vague intentions. Turn off non-essential notifications so your attention isn't constantly being hijacked. Use Do Not Disturb modes during focused work time and social interactions. Designate specific times for responding to messages instead of being constantly available. People will adapt to your response patterns, and the relationships worth maintaining will respect your boundaries. Finding communities that value authenticity over performance means looking beyond online spaces and casual acquaintances. Join activities where people gather around shared interests or goals rather than just socializing. Volunteer for causes you care about. Take classes where you're learning something new alongside others. These contexts create natural opportunities for connection based on common experiences rather than image management. People see you struggling with the same challenges they're facing, which builds genuine camaraderie. Create accountability systems that don't depend on motivation or willpower. Tell someone about the changes you're making and ask them to check in with you regularly. Use habit tracking apps not for perfectionism, but for awareness of your patterns. Build environmental cues that make good choices easier and bad choices harder. Put your phone in a drawer when you want to have undistracted time. Keep a book next to your bed so you have an alternative to scrolling before sleep. The compound effect of small changes becomes visible after weeks rather than days. Each authentic conversation makes the next one slightly easier. Each time you sit with uncomfortable emotions without immediately seeking distraction, your tolerance for discomfort increases. Each day you follow through on commitments to yourself, your self-trust grows stronger. These changes interact with each other in ways that create momentum. Better sleep improves emotional regulation, which makes authentic conversations easier, which builds confidence, which makes you more willing to take social risks. Stop waiting for perfect conditions or complete readiness before taking action. Your generation has been taught that preparation prevents failure, but over-preparation often prevents starting. You don't need to have everything figured out before you begin making changes. You don't need to feel confident before acting confidently. You don't need to eliminate all social anxiety before having meaningful conversations. Action creates clarity and confidence, not the other way around. Track progress through specific behaviors rather than feelings, because emotions fluctuate based on countless variables beyond your control. Did you have one real conversation today? Did you spend time away from screens? Did you do something you committed to doing even when you didn't feel like it? These concrete measures give you accurate feedback about whether you're moving in the right direction, regardless of whether you feel immediately better. The stakes of this work extend far beyond your personal comfort. Scientific American reports that loneliness increases health risks, including heart disease and stroke, making this literally a matter of life and death. Loneliness reduces civic engagement. People without close friends vote at significantly lower rates, weakening democratic participation. Deloitte found that your generation craves meaningful work, but isolated individuals struggle to contribute meaningfully to anything larger than themselves. Start tonight with Peterson's original question. Then tomorrow morning, make your bed and send one genuine message to someone you care about. These tiny actions will feel insignificant, but they're the beginning of something much larger than your individual experience. Why this matters more than you think. The broader implications of these individual changes reveal why this matters more than you think. When 73% of an entire generation reports feeling isolated, we're looking at a social crisis that will reshape democracy, families, and culture for decades to come. Lonely people don't just withdraw from relationships. They withdraw from civic engagement, community participation, and the shared institutions that hold societies together. They stop voting, volunteering, and contributing to causes beyond themselves. A generation of isolated individuals creates a society of disconnected citizens who can't work together to solve collective problems. Democracy requires people who can engage in good faith disagreement, find common ground with those who think differently, and trust that others have legitimate concerns even when they disagree with their conclusions. These skills develop through face-to-face relationships, where you learn to navigate conflict without destroying the relationship. When most of your social interaction happens through screens and algorithms, you never develop the emotional resilience required for democratic participation. You end up in echo chambers, where disagreement feels like personal attack rather than normal human interaction. The economic implications are staggering but rarely discussed. Lonely people are less productive at work, take more sick days, and change jobs more frequently. They struggle with teamwork and leadership because these require the social skills that develop through meaningful relationships. A workforce of isolated individuals creates economic inefficiency that affects everyone, not just the lonely people themselves. Families suffer when young adults can't form the deep bonds necessary for long-term partnerships and effective parenting. The skills required for marriage, emotional regulation, conflict resolution, compromise, vulnerability, are the same skills required for close friendships. Your generation's struggle with romantic relationships isn't separate from the loneliness epidemic. It's the same problem manifesting in different contexts. People who can't maintain meaningful friendships rarely succeed at marriages because both require the same emotional competencies. The mental health consequences compound over time in ways that individual therapy can't fully address. Depression and anxiety rates continue climbing despite increased awareness and treatment options because these conditions are often symptoms of social disconnection rather than purely chemical imbalances. You can't medicate your way out of loneliness. The rising rates of suicide, substance abuse, and self-harm among young adults reflect the psychological toll of widespread isolation. Physical health deteriorates when social connections are weak or absent. Chronic loneliness triggers inflammatory responses in the body that increase risk for heart disease, stroke, and autoimmune disorders. Isolated people sleep poorly, eat badly, and avoid exercise more than socially connected people. They age faster and die younger than those with strong relationships. The healthcare costs associated with loneliness-related illness burden entire healthcare systems, not just the individuals experiencing them. Cultural progress depends on people who can build movements, create institutions, and sustain collaborative efforts over time. Every significant social change in history emerged from networks of connected individuals who could coordinate action and maintain momentum through setbacks. Isolated people can't build movements because movements require trust, shared sacrifice, and sustained cooperation. A generation that struggles with basic friendship can't create the cultural institutions that future generations will need. When you work on your own authenticity and connection, you create ripple effects that extend far beyond your immediate relationships. People notice when someone in their network starts showing up differently, more honestly, more vulnerably, more present. This gives others permission to drop their own masks and engage more authentically. Your courage to be real makes it safer for others to be real, creating expanding circles of genuine connection. Children learn social skills primarily through observing the adults in their lives. A generation of isolated adults raises children who don't know what healthy relationships look like. These children enter school and social situations without the emotional competencies their parents never developed. They struggle to make friends, handle conflict, and regulate emotions because they learned these patterns at home. The loneliness epidemic doesn't end with your generation. It gets passed down unless the cycle breaks. This work isn't selfish self-improvement, it's civic duty. Peterson's vision of cultural renewal through individual responsibility applies directly to the loneliness crisis. Society changes when individuals change, not the other way around. Waiting for institutions, technology companies, or cultural shifts to solve isolation keeps you powerless and keeps the problem growing. Taking responsibility for your own social reality is how you contribute to fixing a societal problem. Authentic, connected individuals create positive cycles that attract others seeking the same thing. When you develop genuine confidence and real relationships, you become someone others want to be around and learn from. You model what's possible when someone commits to authenticity over performance. Your relationships become examples that inspire others to examine their own patterns and make changes. Your generation has an unprecedented opportunity to model a different way of being human in the digital age. You're the first generation to grow up with these technologies, which means you're also the first with the chance to figure out how to use them without losing yourselves. The solutions you develop for building authentic relationships in a digital world will serve as templates for every generation that follows. Communities with high levels of social connection show better outcomes across every measure: lower crime rates, better educational achievement, stronger local economies, more civic engagement, better health outcomes. These aren't coincidences. Connected people invest in their communities because they have relationships worth protecting. They volunteer, vote, start businesses, and support local institutions because they feel part of something larger than themselves. The path forward starts with the smallest possible commitments. Lally's 2010 research on habit formation shows that simple daily actions like making your bed or sending genuine check-in texts create the foundation for larger changes. Practice nightly self-reflection and morning micro-reflection for at least 10 minutes. UNICEF research confirms that consistent habit timelines matter more than intensity. These micro-commitments compound into transformation that extends far beyond your personal experience. If this resonated, share a moment of true connection in the comments to start your own micro-movement of authenticity. The loneliness epidemic is both a symptom and a cause of broader social breakdown, but it breaks one person at a time through individuals brave enough to examine their own role in their isolation. What you discover about yourself in that examination might be uncomfortable, but it's also the key to everything you've been missing. The solution starts with accepting that change happens through action, not insight alone. Your loneliness isn't a life sentence. It's your psyche telling you that something essential is missing: authentic connection with yourself and others. The isolation you feel right now is actually a call toward the kind of genuine relationships that make life meaningful. Tonight, sit with Peterson's question and give yourself an honest answer. Tomorrow, take one small action based on what you discover. You have far more control over your social reality than you've been led to believe. The platforms, the culture, the circumstances, they all influence your experience, but they don't determine it. You do.